Sometimes the cruelest betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people who smile while taking your place. Emily Carter stood perfectly still as someone else fastened the final button on the wedding dress she had dreamed of wearing for nearly a year. The delicate ivory fabric had been chosen with months of careful planning, every lace pattern selected by her own hands, every tiny pearl stitched into place after long evenings spent beneath the warm light of her farmhouse kitchen. Yet now the dress no longer belonged to her. Across the bridal room, her older sister, Victoria Carter, admired her reflection with quiet satisfaction while their mother gently adjusted the flowing veil as though everything unfolding that morning were completely ordinary. Emily lowered her eyes, afraid that if she looked into the mirror she might no longer recognize herself. "You have always been the stronger one," her father had whispered only minutes earlier. "Please do this for the family." Those words echoed inside her heart as she slowly removed the engagement bracelet she had worn every day since the proposal. She placed it carefully inside a small velvet pouch and slipped it into her apron pocket before helping straighten the train of the dress now worn by someone else. Outside the small white country church, the summer sun bathed the rolling hills in warm golden light. Fresh white roses lined the stone walkway exactly as Emily had imagined months before. Every bouquet, every ribbon, every carefully arranged chair reflected countless hours of quiet work that no one had ever noticed. Guests arrived smiling, complimenting the beautiful decorations while congratulating Victoria, believing she had created the perfect wedding. Emily stepped through the side entrance carrying an extra basket of flowers, dressed not as the bride but as another helper preparing the ceremony. Several guests thanked her politely without realizing they were speaking to the woman who had planned every detail surrounding them. She simply smiled and wished them a wonderful afternoon. Even now, kindness came more naturally to her than bitterness. The church bells began to ring, their familiar melody drifting across the peaceful countryside. The pastor waited beneath the flower-covered arch while soft piano music floated through the open doors. Victoria took her place at the entrance beside their father, holding the bouquet Emily had arranged before sunrise. Emily remained hidden behind a row of blooming hydrangeas, quietly checking that the aisle ribbons were perfectly straight one final time. She told herself that once the ceremony ended, no one would remember the woman standing in the background. Perhaps that would make everything easier. Then an unexpected sound interrupted the music. The distant hum of powerful engines rolled across the quiet road before a procession of elegant black vehicles slowly appeared beyond the church gates. Sunlight flashed across polished silver wolf crests displayed on each vehicle as uniformed royal guards stepped out with disciplined precision. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Guests turned in confusion while whispers spread from one row to another. No one had expected the King Alpha to visit a small countryside wedding. Emily lifted her head for the first time that morning as the final vehicle came to a gentle stop. The rear door opened, and Nathaniel Blackwood stepped onto the stone pathway with calm confidence. His tailored black ceremonial suit carried the unmistakable silver crest of the royal house, yet there was nothing arrogant in the way he walked. He quietly surveyed the church, the decorations, the waiting guests, and finally the woman standing alone with flower petals clinging to the hem of her simple apron. Before anyone could welcome him, his steady voice broke the silence. "I believe someone is missing from this wedding." No one answered immediately. The question drifted through the church courtyard with a quiet authority that made every whispered conversation disappear. Nathaniel Blackwood remained standing where he was, his expression calm, his posture relaxed, yet no one doubted that every detail before him had already been carefully observed. Victoria forced a welcoming smile and stepped forward, lifting the bouquet with practiced confidence. "Your Majesty, what an unexpected honor," she said. "We are grateful you could join our wedding." Nathaniel acknowledged her greeting with a polite nod, but his eyes never settled on her for more than a brief moment. Instead, they slowly traveled across the flower-covered arch, the neatly arranged chairs, the carefully folded ceremony programs, and finally toward the young woman standing several yards away beside an overflowing basket of white roses. Emily lowered her gaze as soon as she realized he was looking at her. She quietly reached down to gather a few petals that had fallen onto the stone pathway, hoping to disappear into the background once again. Nathaniel noticed the movement immediately. It was not the action of a guest. It was the instinctive habit of someone protecting something she had created. He took several measured steps toward the center aisle before stopping beside one of the floral arrangements. Without touching it, he admired the precise balance of white roses, eucalyptus, and soft blue ribbons woven together with remarkable care. "Who designed these arrangements?" he asked. Victoria answered almost instantly. "I did." Nathaniel remained silent for a moment before looking toward Emily again. He had noticed something almost no one else had. As Emily instinctively reached out to straighten a ribbon that had shifted slightly in the breeze, she adjusted it without hesitation, restoring the exact symmetry of the arrangement in a single gentle movement. People rarely corrected details they had never created. The king continued walking slowly through the ceremony space, stopping beside the rows of chairs. Every ribbon was tied with identical knots. Every flower faced exactly the same direction. Every place card rested at the same carefully measured angle. His thoughtful expression deepened. "Beautiful work," he said quietly. "Someone has spent many long evenings preparing this place." Emily felt her cheeks grow warm. She kept her eyes lowered, telling herself that the compliment could not possibly be meant for her. Nearby, one of the elderly women attending the wedding smiled absent-mindedly. "Whoever did it has a remarkable eye for detail," she whispered to her husband. Nathaniel finally turned toward Emily directly. "Miss," he said in a warm voice that carried no accusation, "would you please come here for a moment?" Every guest looked toward the young woman in the simple apron. Emily hesitated before walking forward, keeping both hands folded together to hide how slightly they trembled. She stopped several feet away and offered a respectful nod. "Yes, Your Majesty." Nathaniel glanced toward the flower arch once more before asking a question that seemed almost ordinary. "If one of those ribbons became loose during the ceremony, how would you repair it?" Emily answered without thinking. "The hidden fastening loops are beneath the second layer of roses. If you pull from the front, the whole arrangement will shift. It has to be secured from behind." The words escaped before she realized what she had revealed. A quiet murmur spread through the gathered guests. Nathaniel's calm expression never changed, but his eyes reflected quiet certainty. He looked around the silent courtyard before speaking once more. "Interesting," he said softly. "Only the person who built this wedding would know that." Emily wished the stone pathway beneath her feet would simply open and allow her to disappear. Every curious glance now rested on her instead of the bride standing beneath the flower-covered arch. She clasped her hands together, embarrassed that a simple answer had drawn so much attention. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I only wanted everything to look nice." Nathaniel studied her expression for a brief moment. There was no pride in her voice, no attempt to claim recognition, only the familiar humility of someone who believed her work mattered more than her name. He turned toward Victoria with the same calm courtesy he had shown since arriving. "Would you mind answering one more question?" Victoria forced another smile, although the confidence in her eyes had begun to fade. "Of course." Nathaniel looked toward the rows of white chairs arranged beneath the summer sky. The ceremony programs include a passage from 1 Corinthians. Why was that reading chosen? Victoria hesitated. "Because, it is traditional." Before she could continue, Emily instinctively spoke without realizing she had interrupted. "It was chosen because Mrs. Harper lost her husband last winter. She told me those verses helped her believe that love could remain even after loss. I hoped hearing them today might comfort her." Emily immediately covered her mouth, wishing she could pull the words back. Mrs. Harper, seated in the second row, slowly pressed a hand against her heart as tears filled her eyes. "She remembers," the elderly widow whispered. "She actually remembered what I told her." A gentle murmur rippled through the guests. Nathaniel said nothing. Instead, He slowly walked toward the welcome table near the church entrance where an elegant guest book rested beside fresh flowers. He carefully opened the first page. Every line had been written in graceful handwriting, with thoughtful notes welcoming family members traveling from different states. Beside several names were tiny symbols indicating dietary preferences, mobility assistance, and reserved seating for elderly relatives. Remarkably considerate, Nathaniel observed. Victoria remained silent. She had never opened the book before that morning. Emily lowered her eyes once again, hoping no one would ask another question. Just then, a little girl wearing a pale blue flower dress skipped across the courtyard, holding a basket that was nearly as large as she was. She stopped beside Emily and smiled brightly. "Miss Emily," she said with innocent excitement, "I found the extra rose petals where you hid them yesterday." Emily gently knelt beside her. "Thank you, Sophie." The child looked around at the crowd, confused by the silence. "Why is everyone staring?" she asked. Before Emily could answer, Sophie continued with the complete honesty only a child could offer. "Yesterday Miss Emily stayed here until it got dark. She was crying while she fixed all the flowers because she said today had to be perfect." The courtyard became completely still. Sophie tilted her head innocently toward Victoria. "I thought Miss Emily was the bride because she worked here every day." Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment as quiet embarrassment washed over her. She had never wanted sympathy. She had simply wanted the wedding to be beautiful. Nathaniel slowly closed the guest book before looking toward the gathering with quiet certainty. The pieces no longer felt like separate moments. They were beginning to form a single unmistakable truth. And for the first time since arriving, several guests were no longer looking at the woman wearing the wedding dress. They were looking at the woman who had quietly built everything surrounding it. The silence that settled over the courtyard no longer felt uncertain. It felt uncomfortable. Guests exchanged hesitant glances as memories they had ignored throughout the past several months quietly returned. Emily remained exactly where she stood, wishing the attention would move away from her. She had never worked so hard because she wanted praise. She had done it because she believed every family deserved one beautiful day together, even if her own happiness had slowly slipped away in the process. Nathaniel walked toward the reception table where several neatly labeled boxes waited to be delivered after the ceremony. His fingers brushed across a handwritten inventory card attached to the largest box. The graceful handwriting matched every page inside the guest book. He lifted the card slightly before asking, "Who prepared these delivery lists?" Victoria glanced toward her parents before answering carefully. "We all helped." Nathaniel nodded politely but did not respond. Instead, he picked up a small binder resting beneath the tablecloth. It contained vendor confirmations, seating diagrams, arrival schedules, emergency contact numbers, and detailed notes written in the same elegant script. Tiny comments filled the margins. "Mrs. Harper prefers the aisle seat because of her cane. Uncle Daniel is allergic to pecans. Please save 2 extra bouquets for the nursing home after the ceremony." Nathaniel slowly closed the binder. Those were not the notes of someone planning a celebration for appearances. They were the thoughts of someone who quietly cared about every person attending. Before anyone could speak, the owner of the local flower shop stepped through the church gate carrying 2 forgotten centerpieces. "Miss Emily," she called cheerfully before noticing the unusual silence. "I almost forgot the arrangements you ordered for the community center after the reception." Her smile faded as she looked around. "Is everything all right?" Nathaniel turned toward her with calm courtesy. "You worked with the wedding planner?" The florist answered without hesitation. "Every week for almost 11 months. Emily came in herself every Friday afternoon. She always brought sketches, adjusted the budget so no family member would feel left out, and even volunteered to arrange flowers for couples who could not afford them." She looked toward Victoria with visible confusion. "I thought everyone knew that." A few guests lowered their eyes. Others quietly remembered seeing Emily loading flower buckets into her pickup truck before sunrise, never realizing they were meant for today's ceremony. Emily's father shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Her mother tightened her hands together as though she suddenly wished the morning had unfolded differently. Nathaniel noticed another small object resting beside the guest book. It was a silver moon pendant tied around the bridal bouquet with a pale blue ribbon. He lifted it carefully into the sunlight. The polished surface reflected a tiny engraved message. For the day your brightest dreams become real. Emily inhaled softly. She recognized it immediately. She had crafted the pendant herself after attending a local jewelry workshop, planning to carry it on her wedding bouquet as a reminder that hope often shines brightest after the darkest nights. She had never told anyone its meaning. Nathaniel looked toward Victoria. Would you tell us why this pendant is attached to your bouquet? Victoria stared at it without answering. She had never noticed it before. Emily quietly lowered her eyes, believing the question would simply pass into another awkward silence. Instead, the florist smiled gently. That little moon, she said. Emily made it herself. She showed it to me months ago and said she wanted to carry a piece of hope with her when she finally walked down this aisle. No one spoke. One quiet truth after another had begun to outweigh every carefully rehearsed appearance, and for the first time that morning, even those closest to the family found themselves wondering how they had failed to see what had been standing in front of them all along. The weight of the truth no longer rested on a single question. It lingered in every silent face surrounding the courtyard. Emily could feel the atmosphere changing, and somehow that frightened her more than being ignored. She had grown accustomed to standing in the background. She did not know what to do when people finally looked at her. Nathaniel carefully returned the silver moon pendant to the bouquet before facing the assembled guests. His voice remained gentle, but every word carried unmistakable clarity. A wedding is more than a ceremony. It is the story of two people choosing honesty before one another. If that story begins with deception, then every beautiful decoration loses its meaning. No one challenged him. The pastor quietly lowered his Bible, sensing that the ceremony could not continue until the truth had been fully acknowledged. At that moment, another familiar voice rose from the third row. If I may speak. An elderly woman with neatly folded silver hair slowly stood with the help of her walking cane. Emily immediately recognized Mrs. Margaret Sullivan, her former high school English teacher. She had not expected her to attend. Mrs. Sullivan smiled warmly at Emily before turning toward the guests. I taught both Carter sisters many years ago, she began. Victoria was talented in many ways, but Emily possessed something much rarer. She believed kindness mattered even when nobody noticed. The older woman paused as several guests listened intently. Every Friday after school, Emily stayed behind to help arrange books in our library. She never asked for extra credit. She simply noticed that I struggled to lift heavy boxes after my surgery. She thought no one ever knew. Emily looked down, her eyes glistening. She had almost forgotten those afternoons. Mrs. Sullivan continued with a gentle smile. Several months ago she visited me and told me she was planning her wedding. She did not talk about dresses or photographs. She talked about making sure every guest felt welcome. She even asked whether I would be comfortable walking across uneven grass with my cane. She remembered details most people overlook. Quiet understanding spread across the gathering. Emily's careful notes, the seating arrangements, the thoughtful decorations, and the handwritten messages suddenly formed a complete picture that no longer required explanation. Nathaniel turned toward Emily with calm respect. Miss Carter, he said softly, you have spent nearly a year thinking about everyone except yourself. Emily swallowed gently before answering. I only wanted everyone to have a happy day. Nathaniel nodded. Even after losing your place in it? Emily hesitated. The answer came almost as a whisper. I did not want anyone else to carry my disappointment. Several guests quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Even those who had congratulated Victoria only minutes earlier now struggled to meet Emily's gaze. Nathaniel slowly looked around the courtyard once more. "Strength is often mistaken for the loudest voice in the room," he said. "Today I have seen something far greater. I have seen quiet dignity remain standing when it had every reason to walk away." His words settled over the gathering like the gentle breeze moving through the white roses. Emily's parents remained speechless. Victoria stared at the bouquet in her hands as though it had suddenly become far heavier than flowers alone. Nathaniel took one measured step forward before speaking again, his calm voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Before another promise is spoken today, I believe everyone here deserves to know exactly whose dream built this place, because honor should always be given to the person who earned it, never to the person who simply stood where the light happened to fall." The courtyard remained perfectly still as Nathaniel allowed the silence to settle before speaking again. He did not raise his voice because truth did not require volume. It only required the courage to be heard. He stepped toward Emily until only a respectful distance separated them. "Miss Carter," he said, "throughout this morning I have heard many people describe your work, your kindness, and your generosity. Yet I have not heard you defend yourself even once." Emily folded her hands together, searching for words that had always seemed easier to offer to others than to herself. "Defending myself would not change what happened," she answered softly. "I thought it would be better if everyone simply enjoyed the day." Nathaniel looked at her with quiet admiration. "You were willing to surrender your own happiness so that others would not carry discomfort." Emily offered the smallest nod. "Families make difficult choices sometimes." Nathaniel glanced briefly toward her parents before returning his attention to her. "Difficult choices should never require one person to lose their dignity." Those words settled deeply into the hearts of everyone listening. Emily's mother lowered her eyes. Her father slowly removed his glasses, unable to hide the regret written across his face. Victoria tightened her grip on the bouquet until several white petals drifted gently onto the stone walkway. For the first time that day, she seemed unable to meet her sister's eyes. Nathaniel noticed every expression, yet he spoke without anger. "I did not come here to embarrass anyone," he continued. "I came because I was invited to witness the beginning of a marriage. A true beginning cannot stand upon a borrowed life." Emily inhaled slowly. "Please," she whispered, "I do not want anyone to be humiliated because of me." Several guests looked at her in quiet disbelief. Even now, after everything that had happened, she was still trying to protect the people who had failed to protect her. Nathaniel's expression softened even further. "Your compassion honors you," he said. "But compassion should never demand silence in the face of injustice." He reached into the inner pocket of his ceremonial jacket and removed a small velvet case decorated with the silver crest of the royal house. A quiet murmur spread through the guests, but Nathaniel did not open it. Instead, he held it respectfully in both hands. "Many people believe honor is something a king can grant," he said. "They are mistaken. Honor already exists within a person of character. The responsibility of a king is simply to recognize it when others refuse to see it." Emily looked at the unopened case with confusion. Nathaniel made no attempt to offer it to her. He simply continued speaking. "Miss Carter, I am not asking you for an answer today. I am not asking you to make another sacrifice, nor another promise. Before any future can be considered, the truth deserves to stand where it has always belonged." He slowly turned toward the assembled family and guests. "This young woman should never have been asked to disappear so that someone else could shine. The greatest beauty I have witnessed today is not this church, these flowers, or these decorations. It is the quiet strength of a woman who chose kindness when resentment would have been easier." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because someone had finally noticed her work, but because for the first time in a very long while, someone had spoken to her as though her heart mattered just as much as everyone else's. For several long moments, no one moved. The gentle breeze carried the scent of white roses through the quiet churchyard as though even nature refused to interrupt what had become far more important than a wedding ceremony. Emily slowly wiped away a tear before taking a careful breath. She looked toward Nathaniel with sincere gratitude, but there was also quiet uncertainty in her eyes. She had spent so many years believing her worth depended on remaining unnoticed that being seen now felt almost overwhelming. Nathaniel understood without a single word. He opened the velvet case at last, revealing not an engagement ring but a polished silver medallion bearing the royal wolf crest. Several guests quietly gasped. The symbol was known throughout the kingdom as the Royal Medal of Honor, awarded only to individuals whose character had strengthened the lives of others without seeking recognition. Nathaniel held the medallion respectfully in both hands before speaking. "Miss Emily Carter, today I have witnessed kindness without expectation, sacrifice without complaint, and dignity without bitterness. These qualities cannot be purchased, borrowed, or inherited. They are earned through the choices a person makes every day." Emily shook her head almost immediately. "Your Majesty, I cannot accept something so important. I only did what I believed was right." Nathaniel smiled gently. "That is precisely why you deserve it." He stepped forward and carefully placed the ribbon around her neck. The silver crest rested against the simple dress she had worn while arranging flowers only hours earlier. It looked unexpectedly natural there, not because of its beauty, but because it reflected the quiet strength already within her. The gathered guests began applauding softly, not out of obligation, but from genuine respect. Mrs. Harper smiled through tears. The florist placed a hand over her heart. Mrs. Sullivan closed her eyes for a moment as though silently thanking life for allowing justice to arrive before the day had ended. Emily looked down at the medal with disbelief. Never in her life had she imagined receiving public recognition. She had always believed that goodness belonged in private moments where no applause could reach it. Nathaniel seemed to sense her thoughts. "Recognition does not change who you are," he said quietly. "It reminds everyone else of who you have always been." Emily lifted her eyes toward him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not because of the medal. Because you saw me when I had almost forgotten how to see myself." Those words settled deeply into every listening heart. Even Emily's father quietly wiped moisture from the corner of his eye. Her mother covered her mouth, struggling against growing regret. Victoria lowered her bouquet until several more white petals drifted onto the stone path. The applause gradually faded into thoughtful silence. Nathaniel then turned toward the pastor with calm respect. "Before any ceremony continues," he said, "there remains one final matter that belongs not to the crown, but to this family." Every face slowly shifted toward the Carter family. Emily instinctively looked toward her parents and then toward her sister. She did not feel anger. She did not feel triumph. She only hoped that whatever happened next would finally allow every hidden truth to stand in the light, because only then could any heart present that afternoon begin to heal. Emily looked at her family with the same quiet eyes that had forgiven countless small disappointments over the years, but this moment felt different. No one could hide behind polite smiles anymore. The truth had become too clear. Her father slowly stepped away from the front of the church, his shoulders seeming heavier than they had only an hour before. He stopped in front of Emily, removing his glasses once again as he struggled to find the right words. "I thought I was protecting our family," he said softly. "Instead, I asked my youngest daughter to carry a burden that should never have been hers." Emily remained silent. She could see the regret in his face, and somehow that hurt more than his earlier decision. Her mother walked beside him, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Every time you smiled, I believed you were happy," she whispered. "I never stopped to ask whether that smile was hiding pain." Emily gently reached for her mother's trembling hands. "I did not want either of you to worry," she answered. "I thought if everyone else was happy, then eventually I would be too." Her words settled over the gathering with heartbreaking honesty. Nathaniel quietly stepped back, allowing the family to face one another without interruption. This was never his apology to give. It belonged entirely to those who had failed to see the daughter standing beside them all along. Victoria slowly lowered the bouquet until it rested against her side. She stared at the silver moon pendant tied to the blue ribbon before finally walking toward Emily. Every step seemed slower than the last. When she stopped in front of her sister, she carefully removed the bouquet from her own hands and offered it forward. "This was never mine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Neither was the dream that came with it." Emily looked at the flowers without reaching for them. Victoria continued, her confidence completely gone. "I kept telling myself that if I stood where you were supposed to stand, eventually it would feel real. It never did. Every beautiful thing around me reminded me that someone else had built it." Tears filled her eyes as she lowered her head. "I am sorry, Emily. Not only for today, but for every time I accepted your kindness without giving any back." The courtyard remained completely silent. Emily took a slow breath before accepting the bouquet with gentle hands. She looked at her sister for a long moment before speaking the words no one expected. "I forgive you." Victoria looked up in disbelief. Emily offered a small, peaceful smile. "Forgiveness does not erase what happened. It simply means I will not carry this pain into tomorrow." Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Mrs. Sullivan smiled with quiet pride while Mrs. Harper nodded through glistening eyes. Nathaniel watched the exchange without speaking. The compassion Emily had shown throughout the day was not an act. It was simply who she was. Emily then looked toward both of her parents. "I love our family," she said gently. "But from this day forward, I cannot disappear so someone else feels comfortable. I want to live honestly, even if that makes life more difficult sometimes." Her father slowly nodded. "You never have to disappear again." The afternoon sun slipped lower across the churchyard, casting long golden shadows beneath the white roses as the family stood together for the first time that day without pretending that everything was already perfect, knowing instead that healing had finally begun because the truth had been welcomed instead of hidden. The last rays of the afternoon sun stretched across the quiet churchyard, turning every white rose into a soft shade of gold. The ceremony that had been planned for months had never taken place, yet no one seemed eager to leave. Something far more meaningful had unfolded beneath the flower-covered arch. Emily stood peacefully with the bouquet resting gently in her hands, the silver moon pendant catching the fading light beside the royal medal of honor that now rested around her neck. For the first time in a very long while, she no longer felt invisible. Nathaniel approached with the same quiet respect he had shown since the moment he arrived. In his hands remained the small velvet case bearing the royal crest. He looked at Emily with a warm smile before placing the unopened case upon a nearby wooden table decorated with white roses. "This does not belong to today," he said softly. "Every important promise deserves to be made freely, never during confusion, and never because someone feels they owe another person their future." Emily looked at the unopened case with quiet curiosity before lifting her eyes to meet his. "You are leaving it here?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "I am leaving you a choice. It is something no one should ever take from you again." Emily felt an unexpected sense of peace settle inside her heart. For so long she had believed love meant sacrificing herself until nothing remained. Yet the man standing before her had asked for nothing except honesty. Somehow that simple respect felt more valuable than any grand declaration. Nathaniel extended his hand, not to lead her away, but simply as a gesture of farewell. Emily accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You gave me something I thought I had already lost." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "And what is that?" Emily looked around the churchyard where her family now stood together speaking honestly for the first time in years. Mrs. Sullivan laughed gently with Mrs. Harper while the florist handed leftover bouquets to children waiting nearby. Even Victoria was helping gather the decorations without trying to stand at the center of attention. Emily smiled through grateful eyes. "The courage to believe my life still belongs to me. Nathaniel's expression reflected quiet admiration. Then today has been worthwhile. He stepped back before joining the royal guards waiting beside the procession of black vehicles. As the engine started, he glanced toward Emily one final time. Neither of them spoke another word. None were needed. The convoy slowly disappeared beyond the rolling hills as evening settled across the countryside. Emily remained beneath the flower-covered arch, holding the bouquet she had once believed she would never carry. The unopened velvet case rested safely on the wooden table nearby, untouched, unclaimed, and entirely her decision. She realized that the most beautiful part of her story had never been the wedding she almost lost. It was the moment she finally understood that genuine love begins with respect, true strength chooses kindness, and destiny never forgets the heart that quietly continues to do what is right even when no one is watching. As the final church bell echoed across the peaceful fields, Emily turned toward the road leading home with hope in her heart, knowing that the next chapter of her life would not be written by fear, obligation, or sacrifice, but by the freedom to choose the future she truly deserved.